Hello, my name is Renee Fleury. I'm sorry if I'm only like 6 inches above this. I am very short. That's okay. Um, I am a druid and a horticulturist, and tonight I am here in character as the one and only Madame Datura. Madame Datura is a 19th century botanist who runs an apothecary, and she has three late husbands. Believe the hype. The rumors are all true. Anywho, I am here. I find myself here in the 21st century in the delightful time of 2024 because I'm currently running from a scandal, hiding out. But you know, a time traveler is always right on time. And here I find myself honored to be here at the Chappaqua Library presenting to you tonight. So, a little bit about who I am in the not in character world as Renee Fleury. I am a druid, which means I am a priestess of the earth. I am a steward of the earth, plants, and the ground beneath our feet are my entire life. The druids of old were the ancient Celtic philosophers, priests, and priestesses. You can call me a witch, and you really wouldn't be wrong, but I prefer the title Druid because I have earned it, and it is a part of my life and my calling. I revere my ancestors. I give thanks to our Mother Earth, and I grow lots of plants. I have an extraordinary green thumb, and that is why I also have followed it into my professional life as a horticulturist. These are my some of my babies, not all of my deadly darlings, and not all the plants that I grow are poisonous, but a good majority of them are. And the fun thing about poisonous plants, other than, if you know a couple people you don't like, that's neither here nor there. The fun thing is that they are actually completely medicinal, and my plants are here to help, heal, and educate and not harm. So, on that note, putting my disclaimer out there, what you do with this information past this point is entirely up to you. All this information is strictly for educational and entertainment purposes only. It comes from a deep place of passion and love and has been the result of a long journey of personal healing and exploration. So, without further ado, the Druid's Deadly Darlings. So, tonight's topic, it is an ongoing series that I do. And I've been doing the Druid's Deadly Darlings for about 3 or 4 years now. It began at a request of a friend of mine. He asked me to do a talk at a steampunk event where we all dress up and pretend that we're in the 19th century and we're all time travelers. And it just grew from there. And it is actually in the process of blooming, you could say. Um, Tonight is just the basic overview of the poisonous plants that surround us, but there are very many subtopics that I do, and it is actually uh, an ongoing series of talks at the Putnam Valley Library. So next month you'll also be able to catch me there, where I will be talking about femme fatales, the lady poisoners of history. So here with me tonight, I do have a few friends, as I've said, to educate my illustrate, and educate my point. Um, what makes these plants poisonous, though? That is the first question that I would like to address because a lot of people you hear poisonous plants and you might go, "Oh, that's very fascinating," and a lot of people it's funny, they, like, jump away, like, when I bring the plants up to them, and I'm like, "Well, they're not gonna reach out and get you, that's not how it works." Although some of them are toxic, which means that they are poisonous to the touch. I have one of those here with me today, and I will be discussing it. Not to worry, plant, you are on my list. Um, Also, I'm looking at my friend Spike here, and he doesn't look happy to be here. But anywho, it's also fall, so if there's a few wilting leaves in here, forgive that. It's better that they be indoors and safe and adjusting than out there in the cold, although it is quite warm tonight. So, what makes them poisonous? Well, poisonous plants, um, they evolved what we know, what we call alkaloids, and it was originally a defense mechanism, as far as we can tell, because as life evolved, animals evolved after the plants, right? And they had to defend themselves somehow because they were getting eaten. So, the things that make them poisonous are alkaloids. They are molecular structures within the plants. And to botanists, scientists' best knowledge, alkaloids are used to they're growth regulators, although there is some discrepancy, and I think it's rather fascinating. For as long as we've been studying plants, they don't seem to have come to a really cohesive answer on what alkaloids are. But that is, to me, the leading theory, and the reason for this is certain plants are not poisonous at all. And certain plants are only poisonous at certain times of the year. And so certain plants are poisonous with edible parts. And we eat some of those plants all the time. Um, Two of my plants here are in the nightshade family, such as Spike. He is in the blue pot, the Day of the Dead skull there. My son Dante named him Spike because he is Solanum pyracanthum, and he's got long, sharp orange spikes all over him. So he is also known as a porcupine tomato for good reason. They can grow into a rather large bush. This one comes in and out of the house, doesn't get as much light where I planted in the summertime as it needs, so he stayed rather small, but that makes it convenient because I can plant them in fun Halloween skulls that I just keep acquiring every year as the plant gets bigger. This is his second skull that he's been in. Spike is quite poisonous. Again, he's called the porcupine tomato. Some of the other ones of the same species that I still have planted in the ground do have little itty bitty tomatoes, and they are very closely related to tomatoes that we eat. Tomato Tomatoes are Solanum lysopersicum, and the tomato vine is not poisonous. Tomato leaves, as far as I know, are not poisonous. And not all nightshades are poisonous. They belong to the family Solanaceae, and the genus is Solanum, and that genus encompasses things like spike here, tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, and peppers, both sweet and hot varieties. They're in a different genus, but they're also closely related. They're also nightshades. And the second nightshade that's here with me is Datura stramonium. I grow three different species of Datura. I do not have my favorite species here with me today. This one was looking a little bit better. It is also known as Jimson weed. Datura stramonium, actually all species of datura, are native to the American Southwest and the Caribbean islands and parts of Central and South America. Although it is commonly cited as being native to India, because interestingly enough, this plant somehow made its way to India thousands of years ago and became known as the sacred flower of Lord Shiva, the Hindu god of destruction, change, and healing. He's a god of transformation, and as a god of transformation and destruction, it is only appropriate that he would be considered a god of healing. And I think it's fun that this happens to be his sacred flower because, for as poisonous as Datura is, and it is poisonous to everything. It is extremely well, I wouldn't call it toxic, not poisonous to the touch, but it has a high toxicity. But it is extremely healing. I currently have a Datura ointment on my back that I have made because I don't know what I've done to myself lately, but my back and particularly my shoulders are in a lot of pain. But it is wonderful as a muscle relaxant, and I do make the salves myself. The salve comes from my Datura anoxia plants, although the recipe that I found, which is in one of my books that I can write, I didn't write them, but one of the recommended books that I have here, there's actually a recipe for that, and it calls for this species. But at the time when I made it last year, I didn't have this plant. And the reason why that works so well on sore, achy, and really bound up muscles is because it's one of the way in which this plant can kill you. The way in which botanical poisoning works, and I always say do no harm, no matter what. But botanical poisoning is one of the worst ways to go. So, if you're going to off someone, maybe there are kinder ways, but again, please don't do that. So, botanical poisoning, pardon the dark humor. I try to be funny. If I'm not funny, I apologize. Um, I think I am. Anyway, how datura poisoning? Let's just go with the one species here. How it works is this plant has a powerful effect on the circulatory system. It also has a powerful effect on your respiratory system and on your nervous system. Hello, welcome. Come on in. You've tuned into the best part, how the plants do you in. Um, and it's actually my favorite plant that I'm discussing. So it has a powerful effect on multiple different, the entire body, and so it will shut down like 5 or 6 different parts of the body until it kind of just gives up. And as a result, it actually, in small doses, results in a wonderfully healing medicine. And it is the dosage that makes the poison. Dosage that makes the poison, which is actually an entire other subtopic of this entire series that I give called The Fine Line. But I will discuss a little bit more on that today. Um, so, as a salve, I make the salve out of the datura seeds with arnica flower and comfrey root. Datura and comfrey are also known as bone building plants. They are good for uh, facilitating bone regrowth. They're also good for healing wounds and eczema. It does make me a little bit nervous to put it on my skin, knowing just how toxic it can be. But I try to stay away from some of the open wounds. But as a person with eczema, I have put it on. I haven't dropped dead yet, but I do certainly use it in moderation. And it's also wonderful for anxiety relief. And it is currently being studied for mental illness, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, etc. And one of the other species I grow, Datura mattel, is, I believe, one of the ones in particular that they are studying for bipolar and depression. And so sometimes when I'm really stressed, I will put it right lightly, right on my temples, and it drops my anxiety immediately. It's actually very remarkable. But I always say exercise caution when dealing with any of these plants. Even if you're just going to plant them, definitely just wear gloves. I feel like that's common sense. All of them are actually readily available, mostly anywhere. Datura is an odd one. You might have to look around for it. I do grow them. And they are invasive. While they are from the southwest of the United States, they're invasive in this part of the country, but they're not as invasive as other species. And it's sad, as somebody who's a horticulturist, and I try to be as environmentally as friendly as possible. It kind of breaks my heart a little bit that one of my favorite plants is kind of a pest. So, moving on from Lady Datura here, um, another one that is an invasive species here in North America is oleander. This one here, this is Nerium oleander. This particular variety is called pink ice, and it's actually meant for smaller containers. I bought this one specifically so that I could cart it around to my talks. Again, it does come in and outside with me every year. Right now, it looks a little rough because it's in my greenhouse and it wasn't used to that much humidity. But we're there from naturally, and we're there growing wild here in the states. It certainly can put up with a lot of humidity. It's called Nerium, from Greek neros, meaning water, by the water, because it likes to grow by the water in the Mediterranean region. It is also native to parts of Egypt and, I believe, Saudi Arabia, in that general vicinity, corner of the globe. And here in North America, it runs rampant down in South Carolina and down into Florida, um, because it grows so well in those climates. As you can see from its habit, the way that it's very pliable here, and it's got these long kind of evenly spaced leaves. It's used to a very breezy coastal area. So this plant is the one that I was talking about that is toxic. It is, which means it's poisonous to the touch. I touch it a little bit here and there, no big deal. But if you were to really like, let's say if you're a landscaper and you're putting a whole bunch of these in the ground and you're not wearing gloves, that could be a severe problem. But again, landscapers, most of them, all the ones I've ever met, do wear gloves, so keeps them safe, right? And this plant also, its name oleander. The second part of its species name comes from a Greek tragedy. This plant features in a story in which a young man by the name of Leander falls in love with Lady Love herself, and every night he swims out to her island where she lives alone, and he brings her oleander flowers. And so one night he just doesn't return. He just doesn't make it out there. And in the morning, Lady Love went out to go search for him, and all she found were the pink oleander flowers at the water's edge because Leander had unfortunately drowned. Um, and so she searched everywhere for him, crying, "Oh, Leander, oh, Leander." So, in Victorian flower language, which is another talk that I gave just a couple weeks ago at the Bristol Historical Society, the oleander flower was a symbol of cautionary romance and the complexities and intricacies involved with love. And because the Victorians did know that it was very poisonous, and there's even a story of, I want to say it was in the Gulf War, just to illustrate how poisonous this plant is. Um, there were soldiers and they needed a place to sleep, and they cut down a bunch of oleander trees, which they can grow into full size trees. They can get very large. And they used the timbers to sleep on, but in the morning, the ones who had slept on the oleander timbers were dead. Is it true or is it an urban legend? I don't know. I found it in my research quite a few years ago, and I never forgot it. Even the water that these trees grow in is tainted from from its toxins. And burning the oleander timbers, even if they are dry, the alkaloids don't break down and really any of these plants. The Torah actually breaks down very quickly. That's why I'm not totally afraid of it messing with me when I'm using the solve. And I notice the solve does wear off after a few hours. It's also great for that time of the month too, just topically, because it does relax the muscles and reduce inflammation and pain. But that particular plant breaks down very quickly and it leaves the system, which means it's also very hard to trace in murder cases. Um, Oleander, not so much. But burning, if you were to burn anything with some of these plants, if you were to inhale the smoke, you still would be inadvertently poisoned. But in the case of the ancient Greeks, one of the things that they think that the Oracle of Delphi did to achieve her hallucinations or her divinations, however you wish to look at that, um, they think that she would have may have actually been inhaling smoke made with oleander timber. So they were burning the oleander, and she was inhaling the fumes and getting really, really high and having her visions. Now, I'm not going to move my big friend over here, my beautiful Monstera delicosa. I did say the poisonous plants that surround us. And while, yes, these plants are commonly available in nurseries, um, these, with the exception of Datura, they are not something we are likely to encounter, at least around here, or unless you're, visiting a fancy restaurant that's got some nice oleander planted, although well, you'd be surprised how many people don't realize that the things that are really poisonous and put them near food. Um, but we do have a lot of houseplants around us. This one here is a variegated monstera. This is Monstera delicosa. There are several species of monstera that are very common, and you see them at Home Depot or anywhere. Go to a friend's house, and a lot of people are. Well, you can get these at like Trader Joe's. This one, this one is a variegated one. They are a little pricier. This is the most expensive plant I own. It was a nice gift to myself. So this one came from specifically a nursery, but typically they're a nice solid green. And they are very poisonous to cats and dogs. They are toxic to humans, but not not in a lethal dose. But it will definitely cause like swelling of the tongue and the lips and give you some serious indigestion. However, this goes back to the alkaloids I was talking about before. There is an edible part of the plant, just like with our vegetable friends that also happen to be nightshades. Um, this one grows a fruit, and it's called delicosa because of the, I guess, delicious factor of its fruit. I have never had a monstera fruit, although my friend has. He found it at a grocery store near him in Massachusetts. He said it was delicious and kind of like pineapple-y, banana-y, a little bit of both. And it's interesting because it grows a big, tall, looks almost like a pine cone, and it's got like scales. I call them like dragon scales, and the fruit is actually poisonous until it's ripe, which in which case the scales start to like burst off, and parts of the fruit will be ripe, and then some will still be kind of um inedible. So it does take a few days for it to fully mature. Um, but it only really grows fruit in a greenhouse condition or in its natural habitat. I believe they're native to South America. Um, so I don't know that mine will ever achieve a delicious fruit, but it is beautiful to look at, and it has been growing nicely since I acquired it in May. Um, and so that's the part where I really do think that when they talk about the alkaloids being used for growth regulation, I think that's probably hitting the nail right on the head because another plant that we do have, a native species that's all around us in the springtime, are May apples. And that plant is poisonous. I believe the fruits of them are not poisonous, but then at a certain point they are. Turtles do love to eat them, and it may only be toxic to humans because this here, um, the yew tree, Taxus bacara, it is a European yew. It comes from my own plant, which currently has nice red berries on it. And this is my wand, my winter solstice wand, made from the boughs of a different yew tree. A wonderful friend of mine made this. She's very talented. This is delicious to deer. Deer can eat this, and the berries of the yew tree are actually edible. However, the seed inside is poisonous, but it's not toxic to deer. But if we were to eat it, we'd have a really bad time. Although recent research has shown that the yew tree may not be as poisonous as we think, and the Pacific yew is being used in cancer research. And a lot of these poisonous plants, including oleander and, of course, and datura, are being used in cancer research. So, of course, it is the dosage that makes the poison. But in some cases, such as digitalis, foxglove, where it's been used, that plant has been used heavily in heart medication, digoxin, I believe. Um, it has fallen out of favor recently because the patients need to be monitored so quickly, so closely, because overdose can happen very quickly, even in very minute quantities, which I'm sure they are using in a medical setting. But what they've done as a result is it has prompted science to come up with a synthetic version that's a lot safer, but which was actually derived from one of these beautiful, deadly darlings. Also, I love digitalis. I love foxglove because the name foxglove. One of the uh, w- one of the descriptions of the kind of the etymology of that word is folksglove. They believe that the word foxglove may have come from Celtic fairy lore, and here we are, right next to the Sabbath of Samhain, Halloween, May 1st, heavily associated with the other side and the Fae, right in the Celtic New Year. So, Foxglove was heavily associated with Celtic fairy lore, our friends on the other side. And the name Foxglove may be derived from folksglove, which means, the folks being the fair folk, the fairies, and they're also called fairy thimbles because they look like little mittens. And it was thought that planting foxglove outside of your house would tell the fae that your house was a safe place to inhabit, and then they would thus uh, protect the perimeter of your home if you were allowing them to live in your garden. And because the Celtic Isles are the home of the Druids, my people who are very close with nature and in tune with their roots, literally and figuratively. Um, you get a lot of that nature lore in Celtic mythology. In fact, it's all really heavily based in the earth and what was surrounding them. So I love foxglove lore. I have two at home, and that is another common one that's always surrounding us. We always see it. They are native to Europe, but they're not invasive, and lots of people plant it. So it's a common garden variety. Some of the ones we will also see around us, things like sycamore trees. While they're not typically poisonous, they can spray. It's like a black sap. My father got sprayed by a sycamore on his property in Virginia. He was cutting a bough because it was, just kind of hanging at the wrong angle. He didn't want it to fall on the neighbor's property and cause a problem. Um, and when he did that, the tree sprayed him with this sap, and like it was really irritated. I think it like got in his eye, and he's okay, he's fine, but it was an irritant, and the tree taught him a thing or two. And so what he did, I said, well, you got to go and have a conversation with that tree, because if you got to do pruning, what people don't realize is these plants are alive, and they do have their own methods of communication. And that was certainly the tree telling you, hey, knock it off. But if you were to talk to the tree and say, hey, I'm gonna cut a piece of you, and here's why. Believe it or not, the tree probably wouldn't have done that. And I've had plenty of instances with my plants where I've gone in and maybe pruned them when I shouldn't have, and the plant very quickly started to wilt. And the other times when I've said, "Hey, I'm gonna take this little sprig off of you. I'm sorry," then there wasn't a problem. Plants are fascinating, and that's a whole other topic where I would it's an upcoming topic someday where I'd like to discuss the communication that plants have with each other, because the way in which they communicate with each other and with us and with the natural world is mind blowing. And I actually see it within my own greenhouse. My curry plants like to communicate via scent when they're not next to each other. It's witchy. Um, Curry is not poisonous, by the way, and neither is coffee. Um, but caffeine, I don't know if that's considered an alkaloid. But some of the fun names of these alkaloids that I keep mentioning are things like uh, morphine, as we know, the poppy is another one that's commonly used in medicine. Um, Papaver is the genus. Uh, Atropine. Atropine is a common alkaloid found in nightshades, particularly belladonna and datura. Um, Man, I wish I had my little book, and I've got everything written down on me, and I couldn't find it. So but I'm sure listing alkaloids is not the most interesting thing, and not your most interesting part of your night. Um, so a few others that you I have certainly encountered, things that, mild toxicity. Let's go with some of the things that aren't absolutely lethal, all right? Like daffodils, common bulbs, um, crocuses. They are considered poisonous because they do contain those alkaloids within their bulbs. Although I believe in World War II, um, when the soldiers couldn't find anything else to eat, they had all these tulip bulbs, and so they ate them, and that provided them with nourishment. But again, it's not lethal. It's just going to give you a really bad stomach ache. And if you were to plant daffodils next to onions, the bulbs look the same, and you might be in for a nasty surprise. It won't taste very good. But there is, interestingly enough, a plant that looks exactly like crocuses. And while crocuses, yes, they're considered poisonous, but they're not lethal by any means, its look-alike is, and it's called an autumn lawn crocus. And it has nothing to do with true crocuses whatsoever. And what's worse is that there are true crocuses, such as saffron, the saffron that is in the spice, the expensive spice, which by the way, you can get like a bunch of saffron bulbs from Walmart dirt cheap and grow your own. They do come up in the fall and they look just like it's sometimes called the saffron autumn lawn crocus. And that thing, it comes up in the middle of the lawn. You might see it, you may have seen it around now, like, oh, what's a little crocus doing over here? It's better just to leave them be. They're very pretty, coming up at random in the middle of your lawn, but they're not really crocuses. And they do have their anthers look a lot like the little red anther that is the pollen sac that we use for saffron. The little red thread you get in the jar, that's the pollen sac from the saffron crocus. Um, so that's a good point that I need to bring up is things that have the same name and aren't the same thing at all, like the saffron autumn lawn crocus and true saffron, which is a fall blooming crocus. Um, so when researching plants or when picking out plants for your garden, it's always good to look at the Latin names because we have things like the Lenten rose. I have some little dried hellebores in here, helleborus. Um, They are from my own garden, although my one of my chickens, I think, killed that plant. It was my favorite. Um, but they were very beautiful. They're like a black double hellebore. And hellebores are common around Christmas time, right? And they're beautiful. They bloom in the wintertime. But they're called the Lenten rose, also because they bloom in early spring around Lent. But they're not roses at all. Whereas roses are not poisonous and they're in fact edible and full of vitamin C and antioxidants. The worst thing you have to worry about are the thorns. Um, this hellebores are quite poisonous, and the sap, if it gets on your hands, can kind of turn black and be an irritant. So again, gloves. That's all you need. But also things like datura, which is called moonflower. It is distantly related to the other thing called moonflower, which is Ipomea alba. It's in the sweet potato family. And sweet potatoes are also nightshades. They are they're distantly related to regular potatoes, again, also nightshades. But while Ipomea alba, the white morning glory, it's considered poisonous. It's not deadly, although it will give you a little bit of a trip. Datura, also called moonflower, is extremely deadly. Um, so that's another, and I've seen them in books like at Barnes and Noble mislabeled, and they've got the two plants completely crossed, and they're talking about two different things at the same time. And I'm like, that's not true. Why is who let this information get out to the public? Who allowed this in Barnes and Noble? And it's scary because while most people don't know the difference, and almost nobody is going to be sticking it in their mouth and finding out. It's just not. They're not known to be edible plants. It doesn't pose an imminent threat. It's still concerning because if you there are a lot of people out there like me who want to use them in a medicinal setting, and if you have the wrong plant, it can be either detrimental and deadly, or it could just not work. And then you've just wasted time and resources and money. And you're going, well, what did I do wrong? Well, it's because this book told me the wrong thing. So nothing drives me crazier than common names of plants that are exactly the same and misinformation. Nothing drives me nuttier than misinformation. And we're all guilty of it. Everybody we can't know everything. We can't possibly know everything. But if you're going to be working with plants, just check the Latin name. If you're at the store at Home Depot or whatever, and you're like, oh, what's this? If you want jasmine, definitely check the Latin name, particularly if you feel like putting it in tea later. I have a night blooming jasmine that I didn't bring it tonight with me because it's coming back. It had to be pruned back, letting it do its thing. But night blooming jasmine, the Latin name is Cestrum nocturnum. It's extremely poisonous. All parts of the plant are poisonous. Don't put that in your tea whatsoever. But right near it, I have Jasminum sambac, Arabian jasmine, which is what they do put in tea, or Jasminum officinale, or the Chinese jasmine. If it has Jasminum in the genus, it is a true jasmine. It is safe to use. I'm sure some taste better than others, just like with all the ginger species out there. Um, Ginger, if it's think it's gingerbur, but if it's a true ginger, then you're safe. And not something just called ginger when it's not. Um, yeah, but especially in things like in the case of jasmine, so many plants are called jasmine, and they're not. They're jasminoids, and sometimes it'll be like genus Jasminoides will be the species name because it is a jasmine look-alike. Because so many plants do have lookalikes, just like our friend the autumn lawn crocus posing as a saffron, even though it grows on the other side of the world. And so many plants have been introduced from all over that it is possible that maybe a saffron seed spread, but it's, you know, more than likely not the case. So it's always better safe than sorry. And due diligence, it takes as much as, hey, what is the tag of my plant called? Or like a little bit of Googling goes a long way. So some of the other ones, we've got like there's a lot. I would say that like 50% of plants are probably poisonous. And most house plants actually are. That's why they'll say a lot of times keep it away from your cat or your dog. Obviously, this monstera isn't going to jump out and get me. And unfortunately, at the moment, I do not have a cat or a dog. I did have a house chicken, and she would dig in the dirt, but she didn't eat the plants. Um, and I would always keep her away from like the oleander, and that was fine. But things like pothos are toxic to cats, begonias, philodendron, um, which pothos and philodendron are actually related fairly closely. And it makes sense because they're both vining and have those heart-shaped leaves. Um, like, oh, the ZZ plant too. Sometimes you get them in the cool black variety, which I think Costa Farms only exclusively sells that to the big box stores. They won't sell it to other people. It's called Raven, though. It's very cool. I have one. Um, those are also really poisonous. Um, and some others that you may be familiar with, I'm sure you are, things like iris, including our native iris versicolor. Not deadly, but is considered poisonous. Um, and why am I drawing a blank here? It's been a long year. I apologize if I'm a little all over the place tonight. Um, but it's always good to know what you have in your garden. And in the springtime, I am actually going to be giving a talk on building a dark garden, building a garden with poisonous plants, crafting the gothic garden of your dreams. And it's something that has come from a great place of passion. Oh, and lilies too. Also, that's another one. Let's try to envision what I had in my garden this year. Things called lilies. Everything's called a lily. Definitely know which one is a lily, and like daylilies versus true lilies. Hemerocallis, daylilies, edible. True lilies, lilium, like the I think sometimes they're called tiger lilies too. I have these deep red ones. They're beautiful. They're like blood red. They're so pretty. Well, they're pretty toxic too. I believe they're I believe they're deadly. They're fatal. And things like aconitum, foxglove. Yeah, like I said, foxglove, aconitum, monkshood, also known as wolf's bane or plant arsenic, and women's bane, named by Ptolemy the Elder. Sorry, Pliny the Elder, way back when, because that plant, it's another one that's really toxic to the touch. Aconitum was thought to repel werewolves and was known as a witchy plant because it was used by uh, poisoners the world over, because it is so poisonous. And also things that look like belladonna, like the bittersweet nightshade that we have growing around all over the place, very closely related to Atropa belladonna, which also has giant spikes like spike. And we have native species and invasive species that look identical, which when we're weed whacking, you might get stuck with it. It might hit you in the shin and go, ow. And that's not going to poison you, but definitely just be aware of what's around you because it's another one that's not not fun if met in the wrong circumstances. Um, cow parsnip, and then like Queen Anne's lace looks a lot like hemlock. Also, the tree hemlock is not poisonous. It has absolutely nothing to do with water hemlock and poison hemlock, which are what Socrates drank, and they like to grow by the water's edge, and they look a lot like Queen Anne's lace. But again, with the little, and sometimes I keep saying, you can Google them, but they do look so similar. But in that case, I'm like, well, best to just leave it alone. Um, and again, gloves are your best friend. Um, does anybody have any questions? That's a good question. I've always wondered that myself, and I know there's an answer out there. It's one of those questions that's in the back of my mind, and I'm like, I need to look into that. And I feel like I've heard it before. My guess is that it's probably has something to do with the fact that they're poisonous and it's kind of lights out if you ingest most of them. That would be my best guess. But there's probably some interesting lore to that. So thank you for reminding me to look that up. Yes. Yeah, I have this. And also, you'd be surprised at how many plants are nightshades and not poisonous, like petunias. Even tobacco is a nightshade, which, pick your poison in that case. Fermented grapes or nightshades. Wicked Plants is it's a great book, a great resource for poisonous plants. I picked this up for my birthday a couple of years ago in Barnes and Noble, and of course, I flipped through it to make sure it had the correct information on certain plants. Because again, I've seen plenty of them. Uh, this one says illegal. Tells you which intoxicating. Henbane. Oh yeah, so Wicked Plants is an excellent resource. I really like this one. This one is fun. Botanical Curses and Poisons, the Shadow Lives of Plants. And this is the one where I got my Datura concoction from, the Poison Path, Baneful Herbs, Medicinal Nightshades, and Ritual Ethnogens by Kobe Michael. And he does use these plants in medicinal for medicinal purposes and for ritual purposes. He may not ingest them. Some of them do not have. They don't have recipes for how to use them. Uh, because some of them are that lethal. Like, don't go making any potions out of aconitum. Wolfsbane, don't do it. But this is a good one, particularly if you or anybody you know are interested in uh, the medicinal and more apothecary side of things. So you're welcome to come up and check these out if you want. Um, and I do have brochures, but that's for my sound healing practice. Someday I will have brochures with the deadly darlings and some of my other stuff on it. For now, I know I said an hour, it's been 45 minutes, but I think that this has been a good rundown. Thank you. It's hard to keep it all straight. The Latin names, yeah. I think you're right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing with the common names. They're all named the same thing half the time. And I'm like, that is helpful. But I did work at Hard Scrabble Farms for like 4 years. And that's where they like drilled the importance of Latin names into your head. And that's all we spoke were Latin names, to the point where some people didn't even know the common names. And I didn't even know the common names. And then I realized that's also what helps me really get into the poisonous plants too, because I started noticing just how many of them were poisonous. And I was like, well, this has always been like a pseudo back burner interest of mine. Why don't I really start looking into it? And then that's around the time that my friend approached me and was like, hey, you want to do this talk for me? I think that would be very cool because, like the Victorians, they had all sorts of poisoning going on. And I went, that sounds like a great idea. Give me 3 months, I'll put it together for your event. And it has turned into this, and it's going somewhere, um somewhere very fast, and it's very exciting. So Yeah, thank you. This has been a beautiful wrap up to October. There will be another Deadly Darlings in there's actually like two or three in November, and then I have two planned for December, and it just keeps going and going and going infinitely. I have at least one a month, and that would be at the Putnam Valley Library. This coming in November, we'll be talking about the Femme Fatales, and the two in December at Putt Valley, and I think I'm doing for the Connecticut Wiccan Pagan Network. We'll be on Festive Flora, your local friendly druid, putting the holly back into the holidays, where we discuss the poisonous plants that we all know and love so well, but how well do we really know our jolly fellows? Holly is one of them. Thank you so much, guys.